Madison, have you adjusted a setting? Because I'm not able to move any of the screens around to order the counselors the way I usually do. Or is that on my end?
One minute to show. Thirty seconds to show.
Yeah, it's okay.
We are live on show.
Okay, thank you, Madam Clerk. Before we get underway, I just want to take a moment to just recognize the work the community's done to keep all of us safe. You know, we're doing fairly well during COVID now, but I just want to really ask the community to exercise caution over the next couple months as we roll out the vaccination program. You can see really a significant spike in cases in Northern Ontario. You see a lot of activity in Sudbury, a lot of activity in Thunder Bay. And really the only way we can make sure that we don't have the same type of activity here and the same level of activity here is to keep on following public health advice. We started our vaccination clinic, as you all would have seen in the media and on social media over the past weekend. And I'm sure we will do a good job as a community at that, but our ability to get vaccines into arms quickly will obviously be directly correlated to our ability to get vaccines, and obviously we have to procure those. Those have to be procured for the entire country. They have to be distributed across our province, and so it's going to take some time before we have enough to make sure we vaccinate everybody, and that wants a vaccine. Until we get to that point, it's really important that we all continue to follow public health advice so that we don't see what we see happening in other parts of Ontario happening here. So I just wanted to say that. And then, Madam Clerk, if we could start the meeting, please.
A motion by Councillors Hilsinger and Christian, resolved that the minutes of regular council meeting of February 22, 2021 be approved.
All in favor? Carried.
And under agenda item 3, declaration of pecuniary interest, nobody has advised me of any.
No one is indicating one now, from what I can tell, so we can proceed.
Under agenda item 4, a motion by Councillors Hilsinger and Hollingsworth. I will have to change that to Christian. Resolved that the agenda for March 8, 2021 City Council meeting as presented be approved.
All in favor? Motion is carried.
And under agenda item 5.1, proclamation for International Women's Day.
So I have a proclamation here for International Women's Day. Before I start, just want to thank you and recognize all the tremendous women in our community who are doing great work. And obviously the women who sit with us here on council, Councillor Hilsinger, Councillor Vezo-Allen, and Councillor Hollingsworth, who is not with us tonight, and the leadership we have here at City Hall, our clerk and our deputy clerk who are with us tonight. and my mother, and my wife, and my sister, and of course my 3 little girls, Isla, Chloe, and Alice. I think they might be watching right now, so I wanted to say their names for that. So whereas the first International Women's Day was celebrated 110 years ago, International Women's Day belongs to all communities everywhere: governments, companies, charities, educational institutes, networks, associations, the media, and more. Whether through a global conference, community gathering, classroom lesson, or dinner table conversation, we can all play a meaningful role in pressing for gender balance. Whereas the COVID-19 pandemic is having a disproportionate economic impact on women, and existing systemic inequalities have been further exacerbated by recent shutdown measures, resulting in what some economists are calling a she-cession, as more women have lost their jobs and fewer women than men are regaining employment. The pandemic experience has been especially challenging for already vulnerable groups, including racialized, Indigenous, and low-income women, single mothers, newcomers, and women with disabilities. Whereas women's labor force participation is at a record low, decades of progress towards gender equality are at stake. We need to take a hard look at the challenges facing women and plan for recovery with women at the table with a gender and diversity lens on strategies, programs, and policies. Whereas a challenged world is an alert world, one that supports women's safety, economic empowerment, and prosperity, and extremely important to our organization, community, province, and country. Yous choose to challenge to support International Women's Day. Now, therefore, I, Christian Provenzano, as Mayor of Sault Ste. Marie, do hereby proclaim and recognize March 8th, 2021 as International Women's Day here in Sault Ste. Marie. And I urge all of our citizens to challenge and call out gender bias and inequality. From challenge comes change. Thank you.
And under agenda item 5.2, a proclamation for World Water Day 2021.
I have a proclamation. Whereas since 1992, the United Nations designates March 22nd every year around the globe as World Water Day. Whereas the theme of World Water Day 2021 is valuing water, aligned with the United Nations Decade for Action, with the water goal as a top strategic priority. The aim of this goal is to bring greater focus to fresh water around the world. And whereas in Sault Ste. Marie, we are uniquely located at this nexus of Lake Superior and Lake Huron, connected by the St. Mary's River, and share international waterways. The Great Lakes combined comprise nearly 20% of the world's fresh water, and only 0.3% is accessible to all humankind. Whereas World Water Day provides an opportunity to make a difference in our community, we want to raise awareness of water in our region through education, science, research, culture, and creative mediums, to learn deeply together as a community about our waterways and find actions each of us can take to protect and restore the amazing source of fresh water all around us. Whereas Sault Ste. Marie wishes to acknowledge and respect the importance of protecting this fresh water for today and for generations to come. Now, therefore, I, Christian Provenzano, as Mayor of the City of Sault Ste. Marie, do hereby proclaim March 22nd, 2021 as World Water Day here in Sault Ste. Marie. Thank you.
Will bring us to consent.
Okay, Council, we're on the consent agenda. I had Councillor Gardy send me a message saying he had a matter on consent. So we'll start with you, Councillor Gardy, because you were the first person to message me. Go ahead.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Mr. Mayor. 6.1, please.
Go ahead.
The Universal Broadband Fund, there are areas in Ward 5 that have less than adequate broadband services. I'm sure you're aware. Councillor Scott and I have been working on this, working with the Innovation Center to try and address this by way of application for a few different funding streams. This seems like one of our best opportunities. I was wondering, in addition to your letter, Mr. Mayor, what in addition, if anything, could be done to support our application to Bell? I'll ask that of you and or Mr. White, I guess. Anything else that could be done as a community, or the west end of the community to help move this along?
Well, to support our application to Bell, I don't think in the near term they were very eager to have this letter, and were pleased that I was going to be bringing it to council at this meeting. And I certainly, when I send it to them, will ask them what we can do to support their effort to get these resources. As an immediate step, all that they had communicated to me was that this letter would be very helpful to them. I don't know if Mr. White wants to add anything else.
No, Mr. Mayor and Council, I have nothing to add at this stage.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Okay, anybody else on 6.1? Seeing none, Councillor Gardy, do you have anything else?
Yeah, real quickly, 6.8, if I could, please, Mr. Mayor.
Go ahead.
I just wanted to acknowledge the province for the provision of phase 2 of the restart funding to the city, and I'm hopeful that both the province and the federal government will continue to plan to support these municipalities as we make our way through what's left on the pandemic. Because the sooner we have some support, the better we will recover out of it. Just a statement I wanted to make. That's all.
Okay, anybody else in 6.8? Seeing none, does anybody else have any matters on consent? Councillor Scott.
Mr. Mayor, I actually had a question about 6.8, sorry.
Yeah, no, go ahead.
So I think this might go to, through you, Mr. Mayor, to Mr. Lamming. For this funding, would we be able to use it to repair the fare boxes? I'm under the impression that the fare boxes are still broken and we're still having issues with riders not having to pay. Could this funding apply to that?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Scott, this funding is really geared towards helping where we're falling short right now. And the main item we have right now is lost revenue in terms of lower utilization of the transit service. So we would continue with our plan on ISIP for those types of capital purchases to what you're stating.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Scott, do you have any matters of consent?
While we're here, let me just quickly scroll through. No, you know what? That was the only thing. Actually, sorry, one final one. My apologies. 6.12.
Go ahead.
So, through you, Mr. Mayor, to I'm not sure really who to direct this. I guess we'll start with Ms. Borowitz-Sebenek. Does this mean, given the order, that the developers can proceed now as is? Like, I just don't know the procedural point of view. Does it have to come back to council for anything, or now is it good to go?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Scott, the appeal now has been dismissed, and so the developers can proceed.
Okay, perfect. That was the only question I had about that. Thank you. I'm good.
Anybody else in 6.12?
Mr. Mayor, on 6.12, I'd just like to declare a conflict. I'd failed to do that at the outset, as the developers are clients of my law firm.
Okay, so I'll have the clerk note that. Yeah, no problem.
Thank you.
Yeah. Anybody else in 6.12? Seeing none, Councillor Bruni, I have you next on my list.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. 6.7, but Mr. Gowans provided the report. Who would I ask the question to?
Just ask the question and then the CEO will direct it where he sees fit.
Okay, thank you very much. So this third-party transportation services, it went out for quote, which is great. I know this service is required. So will they be taking this over from the city, or will the city still provide this? This is just an extra service?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, and to council, I'll have Mr. Lamming answer that question.
Thank you.
Mr. Lamb, do you have the question clearly?
Yes, I do. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Bruni. Yes, we've had third-party service for wheelchair and ambulatory service for quite some time. This contract had not been looked at for a while. Through our due diligence, it was time to look at it again. And so they provide the overflow. We have parabus dispatch at City Transit. We use our 11 parabuses, and whatever we can't handle goes to this provider.
Thank you. So Mr. Lamming, would they still call the parabus and the parabus transfer it over to the third party, or do they call the third party directly?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Bruni, they call our parabus dispatch, and then we would route accordingly.
So that's how you record everything, how much services they provide for us, or like this contract, $172,000. Does it go by amounts of trips, or is just a contract that if they do 100 trips or if they do 200 trips, it's still $172,000?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Bruni, we do it on a per ride basis, and that's how the contract is priced. And they provide us stats on a monthly basis, which we compile with our stats to get our total parabus ridership.
Okay, thank you very much. Thanks, Mayor.
No problem. Anybody else in 6.7? Councillor Bezo Allen.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Mayor, to Mr. Lamming. Regarding the RFP process, Mr. Lamming, was Nancy Scott from the Accessibility Committee included in the grading of the RFPs? I know that in the past, transit, in terms of especially our kidney dialysis patients, has definitely been issues that has been brought up at the Accessibility Committee in terms of, timing and reliability, also issues with people in assistive mobility devices not getting picked up properly, or people not knowing how to load them in and out. So was someone from accessibility consulted during this process?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Bezo Allen, we coordinate quite regularly with the Accessibility Committee to address any concerns that are brought forward. During this RFP process, it was the manager of purchasing, the manager of transit, and myself that evaluated the submissions, and it was a consensus on this selection.
Did you get any feedback from Nancy Scott, our coordinator, regarding the results, and any feedback that she might have from past providers?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Bezo Allen, yeah, we get feedback regularly with the Accessibility Committee and Nancy Scott in particular, and we do address those concerns. And we do have new Parabus units coming forward that have increased accessibility with low floor loading, which should help with some of those concerns that you presented.
Okay. And the fee for ridership, it will be the same price as if, and they can use their Parabus passes. Doesn't matter who picks them up, correct? Because they are going through dispatch, as explained by Councillor Bruni's question.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Bezo Allen, that is correct.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, anybody else on 6-7? Seeing none, Councillor Bruni, did you have any other matters on consent?
No other matters.
Councillor Bezo Allen, do you have any matters on consent? Councillor Dufour, go ahead.
Thanks. Just 6.5, Mr. Mayor, through you to Mr. Lamming. Thank you very much for this report. I was just wondering if staff has an approximate idea of when we'd be looking to roll out said app that would help with all of this extra communication with transit riders.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Dufour, the target is summer. We're aiming for July to have full rollout of our conventional units.
Excellent. Well, that's really exciting. Thanks. Thanks again for all the work on this, Mr. Lamming. Much appreciated.
Okay. Anybody else on that matter? Council, do we have any other matters, any other councillors with matters in consent agenda? Councillor Shoemaker.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just briefly, 6.3, the Audit and Accountability Fund.
Okay.
Through you to Mr. White. Mr. White, happy to see we'll be using these funds for Public Works review. We're also doing, I understand this year, a Public Works fleet review or a fleet study. Will part of that be captured in these costs, or is that separate from what's being proposed here?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Shoemaker, that will be separate. It was a separate study initially, and I don't think it would have met the criteria for this particular funding.
Okay, thanks. Will we be able to align both phases of the proposed study that's coming through the Audit and Accountability Fund and the fleet study to land, before budget time, so that we can have a sort of whole picture of what we're looking at for next year in terms of Public Works?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Shoemaker, I need to double check on the fleet management study, although I believe it would be finalized prior to next year's budget time. Certainly for the audit and accountability phase of winter control review, I do expect that to be completely final before budget, and that it can inform council on its budget deliberations for 2022.
Okay, great. Yeah, I think it would be obviously great that we'll have this for budget 2022, but I think it would be helpful to have the whole picture, including the fleet study. Thank you, Mr. Mayor and Mr. White.
Thank you. Anybody else on 6.3? Seeing none. Council, do we have any other matters in consent? appears to be it, Madam Clerk.
So I have a motion by Councillors Shoemaker and Christian, resolved that all items listed under date March 8, 2021, agenda item 6, consent agenda, be approved as recommended.
All in favor? Motion is carried.
So moving to agenda item 8.1, a motion by Councillors Dufour and Christian, whereas City Council has identified building and bylaw as a pivotal area of focus to improve the approach in dealing with derelict and vacant buildings, and whereas City Council has established a task force to effect those needed improvements in our system, and whereas the Building and Bylaw Task Force has identified, among other suggestions, the amendment to the City's Property Standards Bylaw 2012-9 to improve Part 7 of the bylaw dealing with vacant or damaged buildings. And whereas these amendments would allow for increased enforcement as a tool that would help to curb the spread of derelict buildings, and whereas the building department writes orders for compliance, and where compliance is not achieved, the legal department is responsible for the required court proceedings, and whereas the implementation of the Integrated Municipal Enforcement Team, IMET, has added to court proceedings being conducted by the legal department, and whereas the capacity of the legal department has been a pinch point for prosecuting charges and drafting the amended vacant building section of the Property Standards Bylaw, and whereas the legal department had presented information showing that costs are saved when keeping legal work in-house rather than seeking assistance from contracted outside counsel, now therefore be it resolved that the legal department be asked to prepare a report outlining how an additional lawyer could be funded from a corresponding decrease in the contracted legal counsel budget in 2021, with adjustments for 2022 made as necessary during budget deliberations.
Councillor Dufour, I'm going to start with you. This is your motion, and we'll go from there.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Just as a point of background for the public, I know that the rest of City Council is very well familiar, but part of what this is looking to address here is the rise and the continued presence of vacant buildings, particularly in areas of our city that have experienced declining or stagnating assessment values. Many of these buildings, I know anecdotally, having been in the construction industry and driving around a lot, they've been sitting vacant for years, and quite frankly, I think the message from this council needs to be that they need to be developed or they need to be demolished. And in order for that message to come across loud and clear, us as a city council need to be willing to properly resource the mechanisms that see to it that this happens. Obviously, during budget time, City Council didn't see fit to add this to the general levy, although I don't necessarily agree with the decision. Certainly, that's Council's prerogative. But I do believe that this is a very critical investment that needs to be made now, which is why it's coming back in a different form with a different funding mechanism. Again, anecdotally, I've seen a lot of really interesting sales in the real estate market over the last few months. Several perpetual vacant buildings changing hands, being purchased sometimes by out-of-town buyers, and for prices that are fairly high. I think now more than ever, this council needs to ensure that our stable of vacant buildings in the city is not growing, that these are being properly dealt with, in the sense that the cost to the neighborhoods, the cost to the city budget is being reflected in the cost of owning these buildings. They really do need to be developed or demolished. And I think that this is a very responsible way to the taxpayer to help fund one of those necessary investments. So I look forward to our discussion tonight, Mr. Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Dufour. Council, do we have any questions or comments on the resolution? Councillor Scott and then Councillor Bezois.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. No questions at all, just comments. Awesome. Happy to see this. I know that there's plenty of buildings in Ward 5 where I would love to see something done with them. And that's one of the things. It's a small upfront cost. I do realize that I probably wasn't in favor of adding this to the levy last time, but the more you sit on it, the more you think about it, the more you see, right? It's a waste of space. It's a waste of buildings to have them sit empty. So I was very happy to see this brought forward by Councillor Dufour. And I think that it's something that we should all be supporting. I personally will, and hopefully we get to pass. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Breswell.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Mayor, just a comment, actually. Councillor Dufour and I met last Wednesday with the officers that are managing the IMETs, which is, for people watching, the Integrated Municipal Enforcement Team, which has fire and police and housing, and most importantly, our bylaw officers. And I just want to commend Mr. Posabon and his team, both Brant and Tyler, the officers who are working with IMET, said that they are fantastic to work with, very responsive, and they're really have really done a great working relationship together. This is really important because we can kind of go to the first step with whether, you know, the building gets boarded up or secured, but it's going that next step. And the longer delays that there are, then, you know, we're not going to see, you know, solutions to this problem happen in a timely fashion. From what they could say, they've probably gone on to about 12 separate properties right now. So, you know, this collaboration hasn't been happening for a very long time. So if they've already done 12, imagine if we can expedite the legal process. And I support Councillor Dufour and Councillor Christian's motion. And I think it's really important for us in terms of making our city safe for everyone in terms of reliable housing and holding people accountable that aren't providing that. So thank you.
Thank you. I have no one else on the list. Councilor Shoemaker.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. How quickly do we expect that the legal department could have this back to us?
I'll have to ask the CEO for some perspective on that.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Shoemaker. I hesitate to give you a definitive answer because I know how strapped the legal department is right now. We will discuss it tomorrow at the staff meeting if this is approved by council, and certainly I think you would find the legal department interested in trying to get a response as quickly as they can. But as I said, they do have a significant workload at the moment. So I think they will get it back before you as soon as possible.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's inherent in the resolution that they're strapped, and so while I agree with the motion, I'm just wondering if there should be a date by which it needs to return. You know, well, I suppose as quick as possible, but I want to be reasonable with their pressures.
So I think, you know, Councilor Shoemaker, with respect, I think if staff gets this tonight and it starts working on it tomorrow, I trust they're going to return it as soon as they can. I don't think this is going to hang. I know the legal department has been wanting support for, you know, some of the work that's being expected of them. And frankly, a number of our initiatives, I think, in a proper and positive way, have created more work, specifically the initiatives we've taken to property standard, bylaw enforcement and property standards. Our expectations are much more significant in those respects. We've done a lot of work in those areas, but you know, they're reaching a pinch point. And so my feeling is that you know, I'd be reticent to see you put a date on it because I expect that they will have it back as soon as they can, and there's no sense in putting a date on it unless you're going to put a short date on it, right? Like, you're not going to put a long date on it. So if you're going to put a date on it, you're going to put a really immediate date on it. And I don't want to put them in a situation where they can't meet one of your expectations. I think we can all trust that they'll deal with it expeditiously and get it back as quickly as they can.
I'm comfortable with that if they think they can get it back to us as quickly as possible. I think the information before us is critical.
I agree. And you know, with respect to Councilor Dufour, he's been patient on this because he's been raising these issues with us for a bit now, and we all want to deal with them more expediently than we can, but we can't deal with them without the resources and the people. So I think there's a lot of attitude and goodwill and intent inside City Hall to find a solution to this sooner rather than later. So we'll stay focused on it, Councillor Shoemaker. Any other questions or comments on the resolution? Councillor Bruni.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Excellent resolution. I thank Councillor Dufour and Christian. I guess a question to Councillor Dufour, is this just for vacant buildings?
We're specifically addressing an amendment to the property standards bylaw that, as recommended by the Building and Bylaw Task Force. The amendment that we're looking at, I believe, I don't want to speak for the task force, that's Don Elliott's job, but it would require a registration fee for buildings that are vacant more than 6 months. This would act as a disincentive towards vacancy and would help to recoup some of the cost that's ultimately falling on taxpayers' shoulders, both by law enforcement when the buildings are broken into, and as well would reflect some of the costs to the neighbors that have to deal with the attendant problems of having a perpetually vacant building around them. That said, I'd imagine that, you know, if the legal department is able to fund another lawyer and to decrease their contracted legal counsel, that lawyer will be doing many different tasks in the legal department, you know, in addition to those brought on by kind of more of the work we keep creating with tightening up standards on bylaw.
Okay, thank you.
I think that's an important distinction, Councillor Rooney, and for the public too. The intention here isn't to bring on a lawyer to do this specific piece of work. Just the demands in the legal department, because of some of the changes that we have made and some of the expectations that we've created are harder to meet now. And unless we make some adjustments, some of the legislative or bylaw changes we're making and some of the instructions we've given to staff with respect to property standards and bylaw enforcement aren't going to be able to be met. So we, as Councillor Dufour points out, we didn't increase the levy to account for this, and it's created somewhat of a bottleneck or a pinch point that we're trying to address a different way. Okay. Any other councillors on this resolution? I think it's quite clear that I supported. Councillor Dufour, thanks for your work on this. I was happy to help you with the resolution, but I'll be voting in favor of it. So all in favor? Resolution is carried.
I was just waiting for Councillors Gardy and Bezo-Allen. And under agenda item 8.2, a motion by Councillors Dufour and Christian, whereas City Council has identified building and bylaw as an area of focus improvement, having established a task force to effect needed improvements in our system, and whereas the Building and Bylaw Task Force has identified an additional part-time bylaw officer to liaise directly with Sault Ste. Marie Police Service to focus exclusively on buildings with additional criminal elements. Now therefore be it resolved that relevant staff report back to Council on a method of funding the part-time bylaw officer position for 2021, potentially from a vacant buildings registration fee, administration fees from contracted services for compliance, and additional adjustments being made during the 2022 budget.
Okay, Councillor Dufour, we'll start with you.
Okay, much like the legal resolution, this one's aimed at another of the recommendations from the task force. According to data that was presented to the task force by the building department in 2020 over 2019, with the additional bylaw enforcement officer, we more than doubled the amount of work requisitions that we've awarded. So that means the property cleanups, the building improvements that were ordered by legal orders by the city more than doubled with the addition of the additional resource. I think that alone is a very good argument to show that there is still more to be done, that the investment that this council very wisely made has borne fruit. And I think that the recommendation from the bylaw enforcement and building task force needs to be followed through with. Having met with some of the police officers who are involved in enforcing the IMET portion of what we're trying to do here, they have said that they think that this would be an excellent addition by creating it as a part-time position. It gives city staff the flexibility to be able to look at this as maybe a multi-year investment, and maybe it's something that as we get tougher, as we clean up kind of the pent up problems, maybe it doesn't need to exist forever. That's why I think that it's worth funding through this unique mechanism. As well, the revenue from our work requisitions does help to cover some of the costs here. So again, with all of the changes happening in the city, with myself still seeing evidence of more work to be done, I think it's really imperative that we don't wait until another budget cycle to find a way to fund this work. And that's why this resolution is back before us. Thanks, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councilor Dufour. Councilor Christian, should have went to you as the seconder last time. I apologize. Do you have any comments on this?
No, no problem at all. I think Councillor Dufour summed it up perfectly. No comment.
Council? So it's same spirit as the last resolution. We have certainly adjusted our expectations and identified for staff areas that we certainly want them to focus on and deliver. That will take some human resource capacity. We didn't approve that last budget time. Councillor Dufour, I think, is right to point out that we shouldn't be waiting on this, and he's introduced an idea that can see us getting moving quicker. I commend him for that. Thank him for that. Happy to work on this resolution and certainly happy to support it. All in favor? Resolution is carried. I think that brings us to bylaws, Madam Clerk.
Correct. So I have a motion by Councillors Hilsinger and Christian, resolved that all bylaws under item 11 of the agenda under date March 8, 2021 be approved.
All in favor? Carried.
And under agenda item 13, I've got a motion to move into closed session by Councillors Hilsinger and Christian. Resolved that this council move into closed session to discuss one item concerning the disposition of land. Further be it resolved that should the said closed session be adjourned, council may reconvene in closed session to continue to discuss the same matter without the need for a further authorizing resolution.
All in favor? Motion's carried.
A motion by Councillors Hilsinger and Christian that this council now adjourn.
All in favor? Motion's carried. I don't know if in 6 years we finished an open session in 35 minutes, but if we haven't, we've done it now. And we're leaving David Hellwig with very little to do tonight, but write stories, which may be interesting. We'll see how that turns out later. So I'll see you all in the closed session.